Okay, hello everyone. This is Brock from Oddspulse here, and this is going to be our first Oddspulse podcast. And I've got here a very special guest, someone who is just crushing it, Alex Kane from Sporttrade. I'll just give him a second to introduce himself. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. Congrats on the launch of the new podcast. Happy to be here and then looking forward to getting right into it, Brock.
All right, sweet. So the reason that I wanted to talk with you is because I listened to like two podcasts that you were on. One with the Bostonian and one with the Unabated podcast, and they were both excellent. I think you had a lot of really cool ideas, and I just had so many thoughts on them. I wanted to talk to you about them. So the first question I had is, you talked about like wanting to have the most liquid markets on Sporttrade, and you identified those sort of like on the fly as for golf exclusively. You identified them for golf as being outrights, tournament matchups, round scores. And then you said there are some kind of offerings that were going to be less liquid. And I thought that was an interesting point because I don't think round scores traditionally people would consider like a hyper liquid. And just like off of my not super well understanding, but I think most people would call those slightly less liquid. But you guys have a ton of liquidity on them. I obviously love betting into them, so I'm super happy you have liquidity on them. But I was curious what sort of the distinction is there, if you could be more specific, and if you could take it beyond golf too, like into other markets where there might be something where someone's really interested in providing a lot of liquidity on, that's maybe we're going to see down the road, or something that you have a lot of liquidity on right now already that people just don't really know about. I know one of them would be just like the F1 outrights is relatively liquid. I don't think I've ever seen you guys talk about like having F1 markets, but they're somewhat liquid. So I'll just let you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, like liquidity is such a relative term. Um, like I think our biggest belief is it's something I'm convinced is true is that sports betting is a marketplace. Even the most recreational book is going to have higher limits for certain things and lower limits for other things. And they're the supply side. They're supplying you as a customer bets, and you as the customer represent the demand. Okay, so we've set up that it's a marketplace and there's supply and there's demand. And that means that liquidity is a relative term. So you're correct. Like if we even look at Sporttrade's golf 72 hole matchups versus Sporttrade's golf around over unders, the liquidity, on the 72 hole matchups might be 15,000, 20,000, 25,000 at roughly minus 106 lines if we're talking about something close to 50-50. And on the flip side, golf around over unders is probably in the range of minus 110, somewhere in that range, minus 109, minus 109. And the limits are half that. The limits are 5,000, $8,000. So it's to your point, like obviously the 72 hole matchup is going to have a bit more of a price discovery element than something like a golf round over under. But the general thesis for sports trade is anything that could ever conceivably become somewhat of a liquid market, we want to dominate that. And I would go as far as saying like if you're talking about main players on, let's take a baseball game. If you're talking the top four, five, six hitters, the probability of them hitting a home run or having uh, like a RBI or over under 2.5 hits or whatever it is. Like one day, I'd love for those things to be liquid. Pitcher K is another great example. And obviously, if you were to look at our liquidity there, you're looking at, minus 118, minus 118 for 250 to 500. Incredibly low. Um, so it's just all relative. I mean, the goal is for this football season, we'd love to be at a spot, there's obviously not making any guarantees, but we could be 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 at the touch, which means at the best available price for things like mainline NFL. So it's always like trying to find more market makers, trying to improve the market quality, trying to make slight tweaks to what we call our market microstructure, the rules of engagement on our platform to maximize the probability that liquidity is superior on Sporttrade relative to other venues. So I think Prime being in New Jersey really helps us because that's going to make us up our game. It's brought volume up in terms of where there could be potential arbs, whereas we wouldn't have had that volume because players can't bet both sides if Prime is not in the state that we're in. So it's relative. We'd like it to increase, and the ultimate goal is to bring that same sort of liquidity to the in-play market, which is where we think the future of betting is.
Yeah, that's great. Is there any sort of threshold that you think the liquidity has to be at where it's worth putting up a market at? 'Cause I know you just said like $250, $500. I'm curious if like whoever's posting liquidity on the other side, or if maybe Sporttrade has an opinion on it in its own. I'm sure there's some operational cost to posting a market, especially if it's unique, not something that's just going to be the same thing every day. Is there any amount where it's like, okay, if we only post $500 one time, we're just not going to take a look at it? Like, what sort of goes into that philosophy?
It's a bunch of things. I think the biggest thing is consistency for the player. So there's been times where, we're going to be rolling out WNBA player props this summer, which we're really excited about. In fact, this, NBA Finals, speaking of the NBA specifically, the NBA Finals, we're going to be doing live player points. It's something we did last year. We skipped basically all of this year because we wanted to be in a spot where we could start to support potentially having the alternates for player points open in play. And I think we're now at the point where we can do that. So the biggest thing is like consistency. I mean, last weekend the Chicago Sky played the Indiana Fever. That was the Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark game. Now I could imagine that their player points markets are like the price is somewhat discovered. Also, there could be a lot of interest for customers on those things, but we sort of didn't do it because I didn't want to offer to Caitlin Clark player points and then people say, well, what about all our teammates? What about rebounds? What about points? What about assists? What about tomorrow? She's playing a game the next day. We wouldn't have had it. So the number one thing is consistency. The second thing is can it be reliably quoted? Like we do almost no quoting at all ourselves. It's not something we believe in. It's not something we're good at. We'll do it if customers, make an error and we feel like, we want to make them whole in some way, shape, or form, or, we want to do something promotional like the hole-in-one markets and the winning margin. We'll do that week to week at very small liquidity for golf. But for the most part, we leave the market making to the market makers. And so can they support it? Is a big question.
Yeah, quick question on that. Was that always the philosophy? Because I also listened to like the this podcast with the Smarkets guy, and I know you're sort of a fan of Smarkets a little bit. And maybe they're a competitor. I'm not sure that they're exactly identified as one, but he sort of said whenever they were getting started, like basically all the market makers that he knew about, which I think it's very interesting how you would come to know who the market makers and sports odds making are anyway. But basically all he knew said like it was too small in order for them to think it's worth doing. So he sort of just had to do it all on his own. Is that something you guys have always taken? Or is it something you're looking to do down the line? Is like if getting a lot more recreational players down the line as part of it is something like posting your own sort of liquidity, something you're interested in?
Um, I'm never going to rule it out. I think for us, the really cool place where we sit, when we talk to customers who are new, we talk to existing players, we walk players through our brokerage process, which is a process where customers reach out to us and say, hey, there's $10,000 here available, or there's $1,000, and I'd like to bet 50,000. Go source me the best price. There's information there that we wouldn't be privy to, but for the fact that the customer knows that we're not offering a price, right? So we'll go and we'll ask the market maker for a two-way price uh, in order to camouflage or shield the player side, unless the player tells us, hey, cool, to tell the market makers, I want this side, and I'm actually looking for this price, which actually has an amazing impact of improving the price because the more the market maker can know, the more confident they're going to be able to be to give a price. But that aside, there's just certain areas and ways we interact with players that we wouldn't have those opportunities if those players knew that we were the ones offering the price. Um, I can't say that if the situation was different, the scenarios were different, I wouldn't have done what Jason did for markets. I mean, to me, the problem is if there's already 2 or 3 exchanges in the market like there were when he started, it's really hard to tell a market maker like, hey, you got this going, you're doing this, I want to start this, competitive venue. I might have better technology, I might have better customer acquisition plan, but there's still going to be a ramp up period. And so that makes it hard for us. It was a lot easier to go and find a strategic partner because we said, no one else is doing this. This is our vision. We want to be the first. Long term, we want to be one of the very few that is offering this sort of venue that feels like this, looks like this. This is our vision, and we need a market maker to not only support it from a liquidity perspective, but something we have disclosed in many times before, to own a piece of the exchange. That was a really important thing for us, that I learned from like capital markets and commodities and electronic trading. If you can get a market maker to be invested, then they're going to care more than just about their profit. They're going to care about the long-term health of the ecosystem, which for them, that may open up the ability for them to make decisions and think about trading on your venue slightly differently. And I've always thought that's the X factor for us.
Yeah,
Is that alignment.
Yeah, I think that alignment definitely it works really strongly in the case that they're going to be like very interested in your success. I It might also have some cons, though. I'm curious if you think there are any cons. Like I know you guys are like extremely good about like being so pro better. And I'm a huge fan of using Sporttrade, but in my opinion, like there have been cases where I'm like, I can understand if this gets voided. Like so I think you guys don't have any sort of adverse incentive, but I think that's sort of like since they own it and they have like a pretty like reasonable level of communication with you, and probably some influence over your decisions. Maybe they could take some adverse decisions, such as I don't voiding a bet would just be an example of like a pipeline, but there could be others too. Are there any sort of like adverse parts of that relationship, do you think? And it's okay if there's none too. Yeah.
I think in theory there could be, and of course I'm answering this question from within the set of circumstances that I find myself. So the listeners want to sort of distill out what I'm saying, to come up with what they want to perceive. But what I would say is that the vision of Sporttrade, is a very long term vision, and that is like we want to be the place where all of the action happens. If you have a model, you're going to come to market make on Sporttrade. If you are trying to get down big size, you're going to come to Sporttrade. If you're looking for the best prices or zero delay or the best in play, you're going to come to Sporttrade. It's like a mega long term vision, right? The only way to make that happen is you kind of have to get from 0 to 1. And this is largely a market microstructure question, but or generally a market structure question. But you have to understand that the incentives of every single different participant are going to be different. When you use Sporttrade, you don't use Sporttrade. I'd say 99.9% of your volume is likely not, oh, I love Alex, and this is not the best price, and this isn't an R, but I'm going to use Sporttrade anyhow, right? That's not your incentive. Your incentive is, I'm going to try to make money. I'm going trading right now, making this bet for a reason, right? That's your incentive as a market participant.
Yeah, that's right.
There are other market participants
which is that like if I have very low, almost nailed it, best price, but also if there's some lack of confidence that some other book will accept my bet because like they've rejected the last 3, I'll come to you if it's a worse price because I have confidence it's being accepted. But continue, yeah.
Right. Excuse me. But the answer to your question is you kind of have to get from 0 to 1, right? As an exchange, as this platform, you need liquidity. But not only do you need liquidity, you need a sort of liquidity that could be a party starting liquidity. And this is something we thought a lot about. Like, one of the real benefits of creating this alignment with the market makers is that they know that the value of the ecosystem is going to be the output, and the input is going to be the liquidity and the price and how we treat customers and how customers perceive Sporttrade. And they're very aware of that as well. Wait a minute, you have market makers here that own a percentage of your company. And what does that mean? We're hyper aware of that. But what it allows us to do is, how many times have you personally placed an in-play bet on Sporttrade, and immediately, within seconds, the line just was, not only did the line move, but it way moved. Like, the market makers almost told you through the Sporttrade app, I was wrong and you were right.
Yeah.
Right? Imagine that's happened a time or two
Yeah.
for you. And the reason that can happen is that because market makers are part of the long-term success of Sporttrade, guess what that enables them to do? They can now start to put quotes into the ecosystem that they know they don't have the right price, but they also know that it's more valuable for them to have a price, because that means Sporttrade has a price. And if Sporttrade has a price and Caesars doesn't have a price, that is marketing. There's an investment. There's things that you're building. Hopefully, that's how you get from the 0 to 1. So you almost leverage that alignment to allow market makers to start to quote in situations that are negative EV. That if you didn't have that alignment, you would never have that quoting. And it's that mentality that, unless you have that buy-in from your biggest participants, that I'm here for the long-term health of this ecosystem, I'm investing a lot of time, energy, resources, and money into the long-term success of this ecosystem, and they only make short-term profit-driven decisions, then you're going to get times where we would have had a market, but now we don't have a market. And so I'm sure there's some potentially some areas where it would, customers would say, yeah, like, but if the market makers weren't part of what you're saying, your business, then there could be advantages X or Y. And I'm sure potentially, if I thought hard enough, there could be some of those, but there's a rich amount of advantages to having this sort of long-term alignment. We talked about golf. I mean, there's times where a market will be minus 106, minus 106. Someone rips over round score minus 106, and the new line is, minus 120 plus 108. Basically offering an R back to the same person.
Yeah.
We're saying that I didn't know the price. I had no idea what the price should be. I just want a lot of volume to come to Sporttrade. Now, I'm not saying that's all of the quoting incentive and all the reason the market makers quote, but it allows them to hit that sixth gear where no other competitor could do that, because their market makers are sitting there like, well, you're not paying me. I have no reason to offer this shitty price for me because I'll get picked off. You make commission, customers happy, but what's in it for me? So we were really, really thoughtful about that and thinking about how to set up the venue for long-term success. And as Sporttrade can get to scale, those market makers can start to maybe pull back. They'll get their ownership will be diluted as we raise more capital. And at the same time, as the marketplace becomes more efficient and more of a healthy ecosystem, they'll have to stop doing less of the, well, I'm just throwing this quote out there just to kind of keep the ball rolling, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think you guys do a great job. I am curious. I know you sort of don't talk about it a lot, so it's okay if you don't want to talk about this. But I know you guys had at least two market makers, at least sort of last time we talked. And at one of these two podcasts I just listened to, you were saying how you're adding more market makers. I was curious, like, is this sort of relationship the same relationship you extend with all of the market makers? Like, you approach whoever it would be, like, I don't even know exactly, but call it like the FanDuel trading team wants some exposure to Sporttrade. Do you approach them and say, like, hey, you can own part of Sporttrade as well as quoting part of this and get some price discovery yourself? Or is that something that you sort of reserved for just the beginning? And also just like how many you've added? Do each of them have sort of different alignments that can all work out together? Is there sort of any non-competitiveness going on there? Yeah, anything.
So I'll start with the non-competitiveness. There's none of that. Market makers are free to quote as they wish. In terms of adding new market makers, as the company matures and as we hopefully find more and more success and the value of the business changes and it increases, the same deal that was offered to the first market maker is not going to be offered to the end market maker. And it sort of goes back to that story of like, well, I was around in the 2022 area and I was throwing out two ways when Sport Radar was showing me a bet stop message and I was putting out a two way and I was getting filled. Right. So I bought into this venue. And so that sort of risk reward changes over time, and as a result, means that you can't offer the same deal to each and every market maker. What you can do, and what we do try to do, is instead of just adding market makers blindly, we try to think really long and hard about how can I get the most amount of alignment, incentive, excitement from this group of people, because that's what market makers are, to care about the long term success of Sporttrade. How can I do that? And for different scenarios and in different reasons in different areas, it's always going to look slightly different. But the general idea for us is we want this to be a walled garden of sorts, that those who come in care about the health of the ecosystem. Because the flip side to things is that if you capital markets is rife with this. I mean, it's like exchanges spend hundreds, tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars a year auditing market makers and auditing market data trails, auditing market maker activity, because they're just have to spend so much time, energy, and resources to adapting to new techniques that these sort of participants that don't care about the long-term impact of the ecosystem are finding and doing. It could create a speed race. If we just added market makers willy-nilly, or we added API access for everybody, like there could be API players that just take off the market makers always when they're wrong. And guess what the market makers are going to start to do? They're going to say, well, thanks, genius. I knew those prices were wrong. I was just putting them out there to get the party started. And I wanted more than one type of customer to consistently pick me off. And so guess what? I'm just not doing it anymore. And so now you've added a new market maker, but your liquidity's gone down. So we are like probably to the point of like too thoughtful about this for that exact reason of like, what is the long-term impact of market structure if I add this participant? And the more aligned they can be in the success of the venue, the more confidence I can have that they can come on and have a great impact. And hopefully, obviously, long term, they can create a sustainable business just like us. Hopefully, long term, we create a sustainable business. So there's nothing crazy in terms of lack of competition or data asymmetry or any of that, because if you don't do that, you won't have a venue at all. No one will want to join, no one will want to use it. And there's decisions to be made, as new market makers come to us and ask, and we're going to be super, super thoughtful. And there could be market makers over time and say like, hey, I'm just going to be so good with player props, in which case we might look at all of our other market makers in our ecosystem and say, how do we incent this player? They're going to come in and do something you're not doing, or you're not as competitive as you could be, or you just don't want to focus on it. That's totally fine. But that's going to bring value to you because that brings more window dressing and eyeballs. And those customers are going to interact with your quotes. And so rising tide lifts all boats. So if market makers are out there and they can say, I can do something unique and different, either I'm super opinionated and I'm still willing to post it to a market, or I can do this market type that your market makers can't do, that is where we look at, the things that can, again, everything we do is for the customer. Now that's going to improve the customer experience. So that's just an always iterating sort of thought process for us.
Yeah, and that aligns a lot with what I thought. By non-competitiveness, I didn't mean like like necessarily anything bad. I meant more along the lines of, oh, this market maker is always going to pick off this flaw, like that sort of non-competitiveness, like some sort of rules there.
Yeah. One thing I will add for this, given like this is a podcast, if you're listening to this, you are a sports betting expert. I'm making that assumption. Um, so so I had an amazing opportunity to go on like a dream podcast for me, which is a podcast called Boxes and Lines. It is a podcast by IEX. IEX was made famous by the book. Flash Boys, if your audience has heard about it, it was a startup exchange about 10 years ago, started by a guy named Brad Katsuyama. And the head of market structure or market policy, John Ramsey, and Ronan, who's one of the co-founders of IEX, do this podcast. And that was my opportunity to go like way in depth in like market microstructure, because the way our venue is built is identical, right, to an electronic equities exchange. And we sort of talked about, okay, market makers, how are they going to play fair? They have such a time advantage, which is so true, right? Over, if I'm watching a game on Hulu, they're getting the sport radar data 2 seconds after it's happening, and I'm seeing it through my TV a minute after that. And we talked about some of the technology that we've developed, borrowing techniques and looking at techniques that other electronic venues have done to price trades using faster and slower players, right? So what's happened in the stock market in the last 10 years is that, I'm using the word stock market generally, electronic trading, is that there's been a move away from this concept of the central limit order book, which is just a simple price time book. If I'm offered minus 106, it's the first person that wants to bet minus 106 that's going to get the price. And there's some really cool things that we do, understanding that market makers have a time and place, rather, market makers have a speed advantage, and B, that they care about the long-term impacts of the ecosystem. So as we move into football season, what we'll start to see is that we're going to start to encourage players to use limit orders more. And those customers will be able to have those limit orders canceled whenever they want, which is a really cool feature. But even cooler than that, if they want a limit order out there and there's a moment in time where that order becomes stale because it's now an ARB or something like that, the two fastest participants, the market makers, they have the ability to actually give price improvement to a resting order. Right? That's like unheard of in the concept of sports betting exchanges, which are all like the most basic electronic market you could imagine. Sporttrade sort of takes it to the next level and says, no, 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 no. We're going to do this thing called a modified auction on demand. And how it's going to work is that when a market maker crosses an order, it trips, let's say, a second long auction. And that means that second is just long enough so that the other market maker can also have the maximum probability that they see that that order is stale, right? Maybe it's the market is 52 by 54. So that would be like minus 120 plus 108-ish pre-commission. And I put an order out there at halftime of the Bills game at minus 118. And it sits there, and I either don't want it canceled, I forget to cancel it, I don't set a custom time expiry. And that's minus 118 on the Bills money line. And the very first play of the second half is the Bills kick it off and the Seahawks run it back for 40 yards. Okay, that's going to move the market price down. Now my minus 118 bid is stale. The market makers both see that. The moment the first market maker aggresses on the minus 118, an auction starts. And because those market makers both know, or in this case, if we have 3 or 4 or whatever, they know, oh, wait, we're all seeing that thing stale. So we're all going to have a second here to give our best price. I'm willing to give the guy minus 107. Market maker 2 says, I'm willing to give him minus 103. And the third market maker comes in and says, I'll give him plus 100. Guess what that price that is going to get executed at for that customer that put that order in at minus 108? Now it gets executed at plus 100.
Gotcha.
So we have really, really, really cool stuff that allows us to give like the fairest sports betting experience to our players, and it's just as simple as borrowing what's worked in the capital market. So I would go as far as to say, like, customers, you just will not find a fairer sports betting platform in the world. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah. And I take it that's mostly like the market makers who are auctioning up against each other. But I had said this, we had talked like a couple of days ago that the WNBA, you had used the term auction style. And I don't know if that's the
Yep.
same at all, but is that at all related? Is that like implied?
It's related. So we have we had wanted to turn that on for NBA, but our WNBA and NBA ticker, like the deck just didn't pick up the delta, and so you're getting an erroneous. How long was the delay? Was it like 7 seconds or was it 3 seconds?
Yeah, it was like 3 seconds, but also there were some really interesting things that happened, which were like, it would say there's $250 of liquidity there. I would try and get all $250 to hit an ARB. and then like
Yep.
say $100 would have gotten executed. And that was one interesting
Right.
thing. And then the more interesting thing, and the negative experience I had with it, and the reason I brought it up, because at 3 seconds it was not terrible. I was usually only betting
Yep.
WNBA at like breaks, so it was usually plenty of time. But the more like bad thing was if you had three levels of liquidity, and say it was like plus 120, plus 115, plus 110, and I was able to do $1,000 to strike through all three of them, and then it would just give me the 110. That was like the
Yes.
main problem that I
Okay.
bring up.
Perfect. Okay. So one small product enhancement that we'll have to make is communicating with players that the retail auction is enabled. Right. That's one little thing we need to do. But yes, yourself there were just you just partook in a version of the auction. And again, what the technology says, like, here comes this big order, and these little two small orders in out here, and the big order is bidding through their price. And so we're going to slide them over to give the protection. Now, the general like concept of the auction and giving retail players price improvement is really for when market makers aggress on resting retail quotes. However, up to a certain size, if we start to sense court siding, very important thing, that now there's a participant that has a time and place advantage over not only the market makers but every other participant. We have to go into retail auction mode. The retail auction is a bit longer in length because again, the idea is to catch. Is you're gonna have one court side, you're like you're gonna have two court siders and make them compete against each other. That's the general idea. Um, and so we generally don't do this, but there are some baseball games where we'll get some orders, and right away those orders are like, wow, they front run the market unbelievably well. And then we have the ability to go and look in our system and understand devices in our system, where they're located, where they're connected from, what IP address, what local networks they're connected to. Oh, here's someone that's geolocated at the Rockies arena. Oh, that's the same account that was placing these orders that were incredibly well timed. And so what we'll do is we'll flip on that retail auction. What that allows us to do is the market makers can still get in there and quote aggressively, but they have just enough time, maybe it's 3 seconds to 4 seconds, that when the home run is hit, and then the customer smashes the buy button on Sporttrade, there's a 4 second auction. 3 seconds into that 4 second auction, the sport radar message comes to the market makers, home run has been hit, they move their markets, the customer misses their quote. It's our version of a much more fair bet delay, because there's no reason to have a bet delay for someone that's betting 10, 20, 50, $100. So we still want to fine tune it. There's never going to be a perfect solution, but the general concept is, if someone comes this fall to the Meadowlands Arena with an account with $100,000, thinking they're going to pick us off in real time with $10,000 orders, we can flip that auction on very quickly and provide that price protection to market makers. You were sort of caught in the crossfire for a couple reasons. One, it shouldn't have been on for WNBA game
No,
because there's no court siding.
that's fine.
And two,
I'm fine with that. It happens.
yeah, and two, your order size should never have tripped it. Like $1,000 is probably too small. We're probably looking in the 25 share range to trigger an auction. And the general idea there is that even in a world where the auction's on, and you say, well, Alex, now you just said courtsiders can ruin the whole sport trade concept. It's not true. It just means we'll turn that retail auction on. And for the 99% of bettors that aren't betting $1,000, $2,000 at a time, their bets go through immediately. And the logic is pretty simple. The logic is, well, if you're a court side, are you really betting $100 at a time? Of course not. Other books have different solutions. You can do it by player, you can do it by device, but those have incredibly horrible edge cases that customers can get around by opening new accounts, using new devices. You can do it by geolocation, but there's people that are putting wires around their legs and tapping their right or left leg based on to give fast sort of game state data to court-sided groups. So
Yeah,
we need to stay ahead of that.
yeah, it's really interesting because I I I understand the appeal of court siding. Obviously, I've tried it myself, and I actually think it's quite difficult to do it because, and I've only
Yes.
tried it for MLB at the Rockies game, as you said. But the the speed of Sport Radar is very good. So I'm
Yes.
very surprised that like like Sport Radar is missing it enough, especially with the number of home runs. In my experience, like they're they're probably like 70% on home runs. Like they'll get like whatever the stop code is. Like everyone will sort of stop at
Yep.
the same time.
Bet stop, it's called.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I
They'll
mean,
send
you
a bet
need a
stop.
couple of home runs in a game to make it worth it. Now, if you're playing in
Right.
like a more syndicated play, that where like someone's at every game, then maybe it makes some more sense. But yeah, that is
Right.
surprising, and that's cool.
The dream to me is like that the MLB recognizes the value of creating the best possible sports better experience, and they focus first on the customer. And they immediately then say, you know what, I'm going to bring in 3 or 4 competitors to a Sport Radar that they compete, right, to deliver the best product. And of course, free market takes care of the rest. And now options, venues like Sporttrade have the pick of the litter. And you have new suppliers saying, I can get that latency down to 250 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds. And what does that allow us to do? We shorten the auction. And the delay goes down, down, down for customers. I think 2018, 2019, 2020, even in 2021, the sports books were just getting live and they just slapped this 5-second delay for everybody. Now we're starting to see the iterations of, well, maybe we can have certain delays for certain players. That can always be gained. Sporttrade's auction is just its own technical implementation of how to solve for that. And then what I really like about it is it gives the market makers the ability to give price improvement to wrestling retail, which is critical for an exchange. If you're an exchange, you don't have that, then your limit orders will get ticked off like crazy. The customers will not be happy with that. But B, it allows a smaller player to never have a delay and allows the sort of the line feed, the matching engine to sort of determine what is potentially a sharp bet versus not sharp bet by purely looking at the state of the game and the types of orders that are coming in over the 1 second intervals, let's say.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a criticism pretty much everyone talks about is that Sport Radar and whatever the other one is, Genius or whatever, like sort of just have monopolies there. And I think you're right. It's just because of the leagues. But that I think that'll probably change if you voice that enough. Maybe who knows? Maybe it won't.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see what else. So can you give like a general? So whenever I first saw the tape, um, I was really surprised by how much volume was going through there. Obviously,
Hmm.
I know my own volume, and I thought like, okay, I'm probably. And Alex talks to me all. I know you talk with everyone, but like, I feel like I'm getting like an unreasonable amount of your time and David's time, and just whoever else I want to talk. I know I'm betting a lot of money there, but I was stunned by just how much volume was going through, and just like I was like, okay, yeah, like able to recognize arbs very quickly using it. Like this is definitely an arb I can just look at. I'm pretty sure it'll be FanDuel or whatever else based on the size or the
Yep.
market type. So how long has it been this much volume, or like what level of ramp up in volume have you seen, or if you've seen it at all? I don't know. If you could talk to
Right.
like how much you want to take in bets as well as how much do you think is feasible to be bet? I don't know if that question sort of
Yeah.
makes.
So I've always wanted to do the tape. Like if you ask David or whatever, like the amount of times that I've said like we should do this. Um, we had to get to new states, and it's always a challenge. It's always like way harder than you think it's going to be. Um, but there were days, during football season, like a great example would be like during the conference, the NFL playoffs. Like we were taking bets that were just like, and not just these big chunky bets, which are great, but like in play, just awesome, awesome, awesome bets. Or even happens nightly on MLB. And we're like, well, we're struggling with the legitimacy side of things, right? We don't have ads on TV. We don't have radio, right? We're not on every billboard. We got to give a player a reason to believe this is real. And so the general idea behind the tape was like, provide that social proof. Like, man, I'm even surprised these bets are going through. People like Bronx of the world, they're going to think that this is incredible. Um, and that was the general sort of kind of genesis for the tape. And now it's really morphed into, there's just an absolutely zero downside at this point in our journey to like not be so transparent about the volumes that we're doing. Like I'd love for it to be more transparent. I think there should be a handle per day, handle per month. How much does it change month over month? The biggest bet, like uh, that's what we like to model ourselves after sort of quote unquote exchanges, electronic marketplaces. They all do that, and that's so critical for customers' trust and transparency in the system. Um, yeah, I would say like on a really good day, we do about 1,100 trades. The average size of each trade is in the $400 to $800 range. About 6 to 7% of the trades are risk off, or players cashing out of an existing position. I would love that number to be way higher, but I recognize that cashing out in American odds are oil and water, and I got to figure out a solution to that because I think that is a
That's hard.
really
That's really hard. That's like one of your biggest problems, in my opinion. I can't tell you
yes,
how many times I've been like, I can hit this arb, and then I hit it, and I realize like, this is the wrong number. Or if I'm just like spending the next 30 minutes because I have like 8 trades on the same game, and it's like,
yep,
I've got like a sell, buy, sell, and it's like it just really does not make a lot of sense. It's just
yes.
tough.
We're solving this. We're solving this. I'm lobbying very hard internally that I think I have a solution that solves this. But the amount of times the team has heard me say, "I've got a solution. I can solve this." Or, I mean, man, but they had a nickel. They could buy Sporttrade at this point. So that's coming. But football season, where do we want to be? I'd love to be at 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 trades a day at that same size, right? Where we could start to do, um, in the range of 1.5, 1.8, 2 million, 2.5, $3 million of handle per day. That's our goal. That's where we'd like to be.
And
And the football, like college football in play is just like, it's insane. It's absolutely wild. Like the customers can get down main lines and alt lines for 1,500, 2K on like any college football game that live is, it's going to be really, really cool for players to see. And of course, there's a downside of the tape, which is the transparency of like, wait, there hasn't been a bet in the last 8 minutes. Is this a real business? But then the flip side of that is, oh my God, there's 12 trades in the same minute here. And look at the average size of this. So it's a living, breathing thing. And like, we're just along for the ride. And I'm like incredibly excited about what the future of the tape holds.
do you now? Yeah, you gave me a lot of thoughts there. So, do you first do you list whenever that bet is a cash out? Because you said it's like 7%. I think it'd be really cool if you showed like cash out, like
Right.
maybe just a cash out icon or something like that. Do you do anything sort of like that at all?
We don't. Here's my question for you, right? So you're a user of it, of used to the tape. So one of the other intents of the tape is that as Sporttrade, we're on this journey to ultimately bring in more and more retail players, and I think the tapes and the enhancements thereof could be a huge conduit for it. Is that you can tail. You can say, "Oh my God, someone just bet 10,000 on this. I'll put my 100 on it." Boom, tail. It sounds crazy. You and I probably maybe would never do that, but customers, they love doing that,
No, I
right?
would do
That's
that. I'm not opposed to. I can recognize when it's sharp.
right.
I don't gotta see.
Um,
I don't gotta see too much. Just
right. So the challenge of a cash out is if you buy let's say the Phillies are playing the Brewers like they are right now, and you buy keep it one very simple, you buy one share of the Phillies at 60, which is minus 153. Right. So it shows $60 bet minus 153. Okay, easy enough. And now this Phillies go from 60% odds to 80% odds. And so now you sell them at 80, which is the same thing as taking the Brewers at 20, and that's plus 400. And we show that as plus 392. Right. So that's how it currently shows. It shows that someone bet on the Phillies and then bet on the Brewers, which they have done.
yeah.
And the benefit of doing it that way is that it's super easy to see, oh, Brewers swipe cash to tail. If it instead said someone bought the Phillies $60 minus 153, and then it said someone's cashed out of the Phillies, okay, well, how do you tail that? Because
Yeah,
you don't
no,
have a position.
yeah, it's a crazy. I don't think it's really all that feasible. I do think, I'm
Right.
not really a good share of the mind of the recreational better. You're correct.
Right.
I have a hard time understanding a lot of the recreational thoughts, but I do think if they saw a cash out in the amount that someone won money and they cashed out of their value and they gained, and like maybe they, especially in the extreme case, like cash out of a golf outright, like from the beginning to much later, and you saw that you
Yeah.
gained so much value. There's probably some appeal there, but you're right. I think the tailing part is very difficult. It could be
It's solvable. It's solvable. I mean, I think the big thing for us is like when I think about like so Sport Trade, I wanted to dive right way into like Sport Trade being a trading app. And like if I had my choice, like American Odds never would have existed. Right. But it does. And I think we recognize like, oh man, we have to get into way more states and we have to develop this product way more to actually introduce such a compelling user experience that customers actually will trade or use implied probability. And so we realized that smacked us in the face really hard after we launched. And we had to lean into like what existing bettors want, right? To a point. And the reason I say to a point is again that the long-term vision is still to create an app that a customer will look at and say, I just don't even get DraftKings, or I know what DraftKings is, and I'm not interested. I want to do what Sport Trade has because it's unique, not because of the price, not because of the liquidity, because of the user experience. Right? And I think now the challenge is I got to create that bridge from an American odds player into right, even like arbitrage aside because they're incredibly smart. They're like the top 0.1% of the ecosystem, but even just like any part of sharp bettors or price sensitive bettors, and I think the way we're going to do that, tape is going to help in some way, is charting, right? To show you, like, when you place a bet, you've bought something. And what you've bought is the potential of whatever your payout is. If you buy 10 shares, your potential payout is 1,000. You own that. That's what you own. You paid 500 for it. It's 50% odds, minus 102. You own it. That's yours after commission, minus 102. You own that potential for 1,000, and that potential of 1,000 has a real value to it. And that value is simply the percent odds in the market. And so I think one thing that I'm looking forward to delivering probably after football season starts is just a super simple, easy like chart of what is the value of this bet.
Mhm.
So now take someone that's an experienced sports bettor and they see someone that's put $1,000 on some dude at 75 to 1 to win a golf tournament, and on Sunday, he thinks back, oh my God, what about that Chris Scotterup bet or whatever it is? And he types on the tape Chris Scotterup, and there it is, the $1,000 at 75 to 1, and he clicks it, and it's a chart, and it shows that the $1,000 is now worth $23,000,
Mhm.
right? And sort of driving home that whenever you place a bet, whether it's on Sports Trade or whatever, you've bought something. And there's a very liquid market that will tell you what the value of that thing is. And all Sport Trade does is allows you to act on that, sell some or all of that position. So it's going to take longer to bring players along on that journey, but that's what makes me so excited. And I think simple things like charting can start to bridge the gap of like, okay, wait a minute. All right, put $50 in, I got one share, so it's minus 102, 50% odds. And now it's something is showing me at 75%. What does that mean? Cashing out at 75%. Oh, 75% of the $100 I get back. And this bet wins. Oh, 75. Oh, this bet's worth 75. And trying to bridge the gap between the American odds player and implied probability. And it's going to be a long sort of march to get there.
It's a huge.
But that's my goal. That's my vision.
Yeah, it's a good vision. I think it would be much easier if you had like three other players also doing it: FanDuel, DraftKings, Caesars, or MGM. One of them doing it as
Right.
well. But they, of course, they only have like decimal and American odds. Um,
Right.
another question I sort of had on this tape and volume is to me it sort of seems like uh, the sports betting total amount of dollars bet is very much top heavy. And I was curious, what like does the top 1% player, like whoever the number one in volume player is, are they like 50% of the trading volume, or what level? What do you stratify these segments into, if you could?
Yeah, it's probably like the top 10 players on our platform probably do close to 30% of the volume,
Oh,
right?
okay. That's
That gives
that's
you
that's much more balanced than I thought, actually.
gives you an idea of like, I think the average player would say, oh, it's pretty distributed, but there are players that themselves will do more volume than your next 100 customers combined, just by virtue of where it is. So we had certain outsized months where we could have one customer that's uh 35-40% of our volume is sort of where it tops out at. Um and the great thing about the tape is you're seeing it, and you kind of have to put the pieces together of like, wait, these three bets, were they the same person? Were they not the same? Well, here's seven bets. They're all exactly 100 on different outrights. Okay, you have to assume that's the same guy just sort of picking his picks for the week. So there's a value to being as transparent as possible while also not revealing like, oh, this is player X, Y, and Z, right? Because I think that we haven't even considered doing that on the tape yet, and the reason is like that can open up the market for manipulation potentially. You could be sharing and information that the bettors themselves don't want to share, and if they do want to share, how can they monetize in that? Because that has value. So we haven't gotten that far yet, or even haven't considered it. But I think there are other things that we can do to increase the transparency without sort of outing any of our players.
Yeah.
So that could be a cool metric of like what percentage of like one thing I think would be really cool is like if you go on Sporttrade, it should tell you with a green dot how many players are logged in at that moment. I think that'd be awesome, right? It's a marketplace. What's going on? Is there 45 people on, or is there 623 people on? Like, what's going on here? Like, to me, just that level of transparency, I think will it has pros and cons certainly, but the pro is like NBA Finals Game 7 halftime. There's 1,000 players on there, right? For us, that's a lot. Um, that gives you as a trader, oh my god, what's going on the tape? Oh, everyone's taking Boston money line. Oh, the line has ticked up 2 ticks. It was -104, and it's gone from -104 to -106 to -108. And I think if that comes down to that next tick of -110, that's a bridge too far. So I'm going to pop in and put a limit order on the Mavericks at +110. Like there's so many cool things that you can use that information to your advantage. So yeah, we're always going to explore more ways to do that.
Yeah, I think you're going to be like almost all of the sharp community is very protective of their bets. It seems like I'm definitely less protective. I think if there's like very few cases where I think, okay, I don't want people to know this and me. It's happened a few times, but like most of the time I'm okay with it. Um, so I think that's probably the right call to not show the user identity of the bets there. But I think we would
Mhm.
like to, or at least myself, I would like to see some of the market maker v market maker exchanges that are happening, and maybe that can be like like just labeled differently or shown on a different part of the tape. But I'm not sure if that's showing up. Is that showing up on the tape at all, or is there any way that we would be able to see that?
Our preference would be that we not do that, only because, like, in theory, the market makers really shouldn't be colliding too much. Like, too much of that, and you kind of have back to that same thing of, well, we're all here to provide customers a great price, and I can understand we disagree on valuation, and that's one thing. But I feel like this participant is just picking me off. And then for us, the other impact that can have is that may misrepresent the amount of handle that we're doing. And when really the tape is like, what are players betting on? And it's again, it's a little bit more of a retail facing feature.
Mhm.
And I can see that the negative to doing it would be misrepresenting, like, oh, you're making it look like all these players are betting so much when it's really just one market maker colliding with the other market maker. There's other regulatory reasons, like we don't love to sort of go down that rabbit hole a ton. Um, so again, there's like pros and cons to something like that. But I think like being as transparent as possible and say like these are all the players' bets. But then to your point, flip side, what could be really interesting information like as a customer, if I could use Sporttrade, I'd love to know what's the position of the market maker right now on all these things. And of course, the flip side, or the position of all the market makers combined, the flip side to which is the position of all the retail. So if the customer maker has a $23,000 position at minus 115 on the Celtics minus 7.5 going into the game, that means the flip side is true, that the retail must have equal opposite weighted average price. Now that's way more insightful than the percentage of the bets or the percentage of the money. It doesn't really matter. Now you can say, wow, well, the market maker retail is long from plus 115, and I can get in at plus 118 right now. Or market makers are long from plus 125. You can get the idea of what side they're on and at what price they're on. Because why I think that's a sharp side. I can get in at plus 124. So they got in plus 125. I still get plus 124. I know I'm not getting the same price, but I'm on the same side. Like sports folks sort of obfuscate their customers and just say 98% of the money is on the Calgary Flames today. And you're like, well, at what price? How much money is it bet?
Yeah,
Like, what does that
I don't
mean?
really trust that at all. Usually, like from a
Right.
DraftKings, because I'm not even sure. Like, is that just my state? Like, yeah, I'm not sure at all what that is. That would be another cool thing too. Like, it was this bet placed in Colorado, Iowa, or New Jersey? That might be.
Yes, that one we could definitely do. That one we could definitely. It was really important for us to have a unified tape. Only because the whole idea is like liquidity begets liquidity, legitimacy, and like we launched into state 4 and it's crickets for the first 6 hours. Someone's gonna be like, this thing sucks. They're gonna be like, oh my gosh, what the heck is this app? So, but I think to your point, it could be cool. One thing we're thinking about is like those badges. You spoke you spoke about cash out. Like it'd be cool if badges were like you just got badges by virtue of what you were doing. So like you bet and it's not you and it doesn't say XYZ user, but it says like high roller. That could be cool. Or someone that cashes out a lot, or someone that's located in this state. Like you might be a corn husker, right? If you're from Iowa. Like I don't know, there's like cool little things that we can do.
Yeah,
For now, what we're
yeah.
gonna try to do for now, what we're gonna try to do on the tape is search is the first one. That's gonna be awesome. Then filter. Filter V1 will be by sport. Filter V2 will be by size. Filter by V3 will be by market type. So you could drill as far down as like show me all NBA bets made in player props over $1,000. As you know, there's been some ARBs in there recently. That might be a filter you're interested in. And once you have a filter, it doesn't matter if you're logged in, logged out, count no, count whatever. Those filters are saved for you, and then it's very easy to sort of exit out of those filters very simply. So I think there's some room to run on tape, but then to your point, like really getting our hands dirty, like how can we really improve it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's all great. Yeah, one thing on the some of those NBA props, I really do like this idea of someone wanting to get money down on something and letting the arbors go to work. I haven't done it with Sporttrade at all really, but it's something that I did do with Profit Exchange with their boost feature. Now that they're not
yep.
gone, I would like to make an appeal that you consider the Sporttrade boost for this exact reason. I know this is sort of in that like not as consistent of an offering, so there are some
Right.
challenges. But I am totally okay with taking a non-arbitrage bet myself in the case that I know its value in the form of like
Right.
letting the arbiters go to work in a boost, the same way that that person or people are doing with the NBA player props, and
Yeah.
so
The up to and lose
yeah, the
thing
up
that
to and
Profit
lose,
was doing.
right,
Yeah.
that's the one I requested. But yeah, you guys can obviously take your time on that. But
Right.
one thing on that though is all of these NBA player props show up as the yellow, like clearly signified as limit order by another player. And I don't think
Yes.
that's a terrible problem, but it is like a small user hurdle to switch to whatever the mode is called. Where
Advanced mode
yeah,
to take it out. Yeah, that's a really good point. The way we're going to solve that, well, we'll solve that. That's a good point. And sometimes what happens is like one side isn't there because it was taken out by the player and they're only putting in a bid and not an offer, and so it's not a two-way market. Or it's a market that they've requested, like, hey, put up Luca 31.5 points. We do it because there's such high volume players. Um, yeah, that's a pretty bad experience. The intent there was like, we don't want to make it super easy for a customer to walk into a trap
Yeah.
where it's like such a shitty offer. So we're like, okay, well, if you're smart enough to want to know that this is a one-way market, but it is value, you're probably smart enough to head into advanced mode. But we sort of position that wrong. And again, that's some residual coming back from like the target customer when we started and the sort of target customer now. So we need to enhance that. But the idea there was like, don't let a market maker put up a 10 wide market and let customers rip away. Like, there might be customers that don't know better, and we don't want that. We said the marketing has to be certain width, and if it's too wide or if it's a one-sided market, then we just can't let customers walk into your trap. Again, that's just like an area where
I
we
didn't know
just
that
wanted
was
to
what was
protect
behind it.
players.
I thought it was maybe just anyone who like individual posted the limit order, it did that. But that definitely tracks with my experience that like if it's only a one-way market, it goes into the yellow mode. And I
Yeah.
obviously I'm fine with going into the yellow mode. It's not a huge burden. It is only really a burden in live because like it'll
Mhm.
just change so much, and then like you have to type in the share price, and it's like, I don't really get it yet. I know Alex has explained it to me a million times. Got to relearn it real quick, but yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we can wrap up here pretty close, but I wanted to just say, like, you're so motivated. So what do you think is like the prime value that's sort of driving you here? And I've got two, and I've also got some questions on these two, so it's going to be a little bit of a long question. So I think some really good value would be like front office staffs could use price discovery as a way to sort of like feed their internal models for how they're going to
Mhm.
position their teams and who their starters are, and sort of like use whatever market data is there. So like if they were going to sub like whatever TJ McConnell in instead of something, they could like see how the market reacts to that. I think that's
Yep.
one use case. That's probably like the most practical, I think, use case. First, do you see any of that happening? Has any front office staff sort
Yes.
of come to you and sort of like talked with you about this type of thing?
I would say the majority of sports analytics and these sort of divisions in these pro teams are already doing that. A betting market, a liquid betting market, is a source of information. And if you're ignoring what is probably the most liquid and most um, predictive source of information, you're not doing your job. I think there's a again, the tough thing is, again, just not to hark back on this implied probability thing, but like the market at plus 122, like it's just like if it just said 45%, it would just make it that much more addressable and approachable by the general public. Like I have no idea why, sort of slight tangent here. I have no idea why, when we see these live bet casts, it's all odds, odds, odds. Like I don't know why the books can't foresee the very obvious backlash that's coming of like my 8-year-old kids watch. I don't need to see in-game cut-ins of the over 8.5 is minus 123 and the under is whatever. Like, why not just make it probability? It's the same thing. And it's so much more approachable. They'll never have a parent or a teacher or a grandmother or an angry aunt ever call in and complain that there's a live win probability or there's a live probability there to be 8 or more runs. So to me, like it's just like the industry has to present it better. But I can already tell you, like whether it's institutions like you know research institutions or higher education or teams, like they're absolutely looking at all this data. Like absolutely, why wouldn't they? The market is just the output of a bunch of really smart people coming together and agreeing on a price, and
Well,
that price is just the probability.
I think there's
And
a lot
so,
of good
and so,
reasons
yeah.
to not look at it. There's many cases where I would look at it and be like, okay, we can sort of just throw this away,
Right.
like especially in some of the more niche prop areas, like
Totally.
like if you're sort of trusting like the Vegas is always right as your analytics department, you definitely have to have some nuance to it. But obviously, I agree. There's definitely value, and so that's good that do you
I think
directly?
there could be areas where like a team is it's late in the second half. It's late in the second half of a football game, or not. It doesn't even have to be, and the team's at 4th and 4, and it's on the other team's 43-yard line, and they don't bring out the punting unit. They bring on the offense back onto the field, and the opposing team calls a timeout. Right. And how did the win probability according to the liquid market, right? You talk about the money line, but it's very liquid, change by virtue of that. If you're an offensive coordinator, you're in the back office, and you're looking at the analytics, and now the team comes out into a punting unit. How did the probability change there in the next few seconds? Like, you're not going to get a more telling, impactful, like, was this a good decision or not? Because if you disagree with the fact that the market moved, you're basically saying, no, I disagree with the 600 smart people. Like, I'm the 601st smart person, and the prior 600 are wrong. Because you have to believe that that market is already banged into place by the really smart people. And the reason the price is there is because it reflects zero value to any sharp in the market. Like, if you go on Sporttrade right now, any price you can see with your eyeball is inherently, in theory, not plus EV. In theory. Now, we're still a very illiquid market relative to the stock market, but the stock market, that is 100% the case. Like, any price you could see on anything that's somewhat liquid, if you're seeing that price, it must represent absolutely zero value. And if it did, the price would already been removed. So that you take the midpoint price on even something like Sporttrade on an NFL game and the money line. Yeah, but to your point, a player prop, you can't say that. There was never really a market. There was never really price discovery. It's just maybe one or two people's opinion. And
Yeah,
you could definitely be smarter than one or two people. You can't be smarter than 1,000, though. That's pretty hard.
yeah. No, I definitely agree in the case of a lot of what you said. I do think the example that you brought up with the punt and how it impacted the win probability is a very interesting one because as someone who is pretty much just every day for the last who knows how long, 18 months, sort of watched and made opinions about who is like going to be right or wrong. I don't necessarily think any of the live models are like outstandingly like correct. And I think
Right.
especially is the case with like non NFL and
Hmm.
especially further with anything weird happens in the game. And a punt is maybe not weird, but it's maybe weird enough to where like I'm not sure. This is like they probably have it correct, but I would really need to see people betting on it rather uh than like just people posting liquidity available to be hit, and sort of
Totally.
maybe have some opinions about those people first. So
Right.
I think it's much less the case of the 601st person in the punt case, and maybe more like the third or fourth person. I think it's very possible that it's like
Yes.
within 5% or so. So
Right.
yeah,
And the great thing about that is like the time that the analytics back office sees the probability on Sporttrade, Rock already got to rip at it, and they didn't see the wrong price because there's a point at which you're going to start to bet, right? Or rather, you're going to stop betting,
yeah,
right? There's going to be a point at which you said, "Oh, minus 150 value, reclip, minus 160 value, reclip, minus 170." Ah, I'm happy. And now the other side's plus 160, and someone says, "Oh, I like that plus 160," and they hit it plus 155. Now the market's minus 165, plus 155, and now both sharps go, I don't want it anymore. It's good. Now, by the time the general public sees it, they see, oh, true price minus 160. That's roughly 62%. Now, yes, the formation of that price was a series of iterations of prices that were wrong according to you and wrong according to other sharps until it's no longer. And you sort of let that process happen. Like, how many times do you bet? Like, maybe a question for you, like, whether it's you mentioned on the podcast you had on the risk takes podcast, which is great, which is as games get later into the game that are close games and things like MLB, how many times do you just bet and you still are convinced the price is wrong, but you're just done betting? And how many times do you bet once or twice and then they move enough so that there's no more value? That's sort of the same concept.
yeah.
Unless indeed
It's
a book's still offering it to you, you just say, I don't want to risk it, but I know that's the wrong price.
yeah. I mean, it's I think it's not enough liquidity, overwhelmingly not enough liquidity for me to be able to just keep on piling on. Sporttrade obviously
Right.
does a good job with limits, but like the next biggest bet taker on most live markets would be Prime, which is relatively new. Haven't made a fully formed opinion on it, but they lock lines a lot. They like decline lines like a relatively large amount of time. Obviously, I love Prime; they're great, but like pregame is much more like well working in my opinion. It's quite
Yep.
common that I'll see like a minus 113 that I like, and then I hit it, and then it just doesn't go through. Like that happens probably one every 5 times, and it's not like it never happens to Sporttrade. It's just much less often. I think it's like maybe 1 in 20, more along like those
Right.
sort of edge cases, like the WNBA thing happens, or just like for
Yep.
some reason the liquidity gets removed, like I don't know, game state date or something. And then after that, it's like FanDuel, which takes like depending on the line, maybe it's $1,000, maybe it's $1,200, maybe it's $800, and then they just don't let you hit it anymore. So it, in my
Right.
opinion, it's really sort of Sporttrade, and then like if Sporttrade's not offering liquidity, which in super high uncertainty cases, like you guys relatively often will pull the liquidity when there's like 30 seconds left in a game or like a minute left in the game.
Yep.
There's going to be no real like conviction of opinions. So
Totally.
I think that's interesting that the front offices use it. And then also I think of note is like for some reason everyone on gambling Twitter is just hails Pinnacle as like all knowing, but like I really doubt that they're like accepting bets in sort of these edge case times that like everyone else is sort of pulling liquidity, and those are sort of like the what I would think are the important analytics time. Obviously, all of them are important, but I think those like
Right.
sort of a triple play just happened, or like pitcher's arm just got hurt, like what happened, what do
Right.
we do now, sort of things.
Yeah. I mean, I think to answer your question, like if I'm looking at uh, what do I if I'm looking towards a market to solve my question and say what is the probability of this event to occur, I have to rule out any venue that would say, well, after we take one bet, we're done because you're blocking price discovery from happening. So it sort of has to be under the understanding, and it can be a sport, which does not have to be an exchange. But it has to be a venue that is constantly trying to find that newest market equilibrium,
Yeah,
and they can't tap out because tapping out means that the sharps can't express their opinion. And all the line is the collective expression of sharp players.
yeah,
No bookmakers like like our market makers don't know what everything should be priced at. They sort of let the market determine that. That's the whole idea. So
yeah,
yeah,
and that's really hard too. Whenever like the game state changes 1 second later, like you're just not allowing sort of time for that. But yeah, I think you're right. Okay, so the on the sort of like mission driven, like obviously I think you're crushing it. Want you to succeed. I think you're a great product. So one of the huge benefits that I sort of see with the legalization of sports betting, like betting a lot, is I think having a more pro betting culture is a very good thing for people because they don't seem to really realize it, but a lot of people sort of make bets every day or decline to make bets every day, whether it's just like being stuck with whatever your routine is and sort of like falling into something like that, or like you're putting a lot of effort into something, you're making a bet on yourself in a physical way. I think like just expressing that with dollars, I think just sort of makes sense as a good thing. Like people should be making bets on themselves, things that they believe in. So I that's sort of why I think gambling is good. Do you think there's anything that sort of drives you in being so I don't know about I don't know what the correct word would be, but maybe pioneering on like positive gambling image in maybe New Jersey, Colorado, and Iowa? Like what's sort of the driving force here?
I think the driving force for why I do what we do, and I think probably extends to a lot of the folks at Sporttrade, although they could give an answer themselves, like the obsession with fairness. Like it's just like, gosh, seeing someone bet at minus 110, 3 minutes to post some NFL game is just like that alone, that will motivate me for life. Like, there's no reason someone should be paying 52.38%, which is minus 110, 52.4% on something that's worth 50. The entire globe knows it's worth 50. It's worth 50. It's 3 minutes to post of an NFL game. So there's the obsession with trying to reduce the edge that a player pays to either have a sports bet or take a big risk or have a bit of fun or whatever it is. And that extends to like the reason why we do it. Like, you look at a lot of other gambling companies, they want to do casino and they want to do horse race. I have no interest in any of that at all. Zero. It's just, I'd rather there's a million things I'd rather do than that. In fact, those things have nothing to do with sports betting at all. It could not be further from the case. So that's what inspires me. Like, I want to wake up and see the tape, and I want to see people betting on opposite sides of a minus 102 line. Or I want to see people start to use limit orders and come in and meet on a price that is just like the market midpoint. Like, that's the other great thing about implied probability. The market's 58 bid offered at 60. 59 is the midpoint. No math, no nothing. I'll take the 41, you take the 59, boom, that equals 100. We just both got midpoint. That's what's so exciting to me. And then trying to take that versions of that, as you talked about at the very beginning, liquidity is relative, and making every moment as liquid as possible. Whether it's an in-play pitcher K, or it's that fourth quarter punt scenario that we talked about, or whatever. I'm obsessed with making a market out of everything, because you can make a market. You have multiple people on the supply side that compete to get the best possible price to the demand side. That's what drives me, is that dynamic, and seeing that dynamic sort of play out. And like, it's insane to me that like you charge minus 110 to someone on something, like, you just know they're overpaying by such a degree. And yeah, sure, they may never care, but you shouldn't do it. I don't know. That's how I'm wired. It's different. It's wonky, but that sort of is the answer to your question.
Yeah, fairness is good. And you said a lot of things there that I think are good. One thing that I thought was interesting is you think, and I think almost everyone in sports betting, Twitter at least, or the discords I'm in, etc., would sort of agree with you that it's nothing to do with casino and horse racing. But I heard a sort of compelling argument to, and so I'm just going to give you an opportunity to confirm, like, you sort of like fully believe nothing similar at all, totally different, sports betting versus casino.
Yeah, couldn't be more different. Well, one's a random number generator and one's a marketplace. One is a complete 100% game of chance, and one is 100% a complete game of skill.
So do you think sports or online casino should not be like brought to legalization then in America? Is that
No, I don't. I don't think it should be.
okay?
I think too many times the argument's like, well, it's already being done offshore, and the fact is, like, that's just wrong, in my opinion. Again, I'm giving Alex opinion and not a sportsman opinion at this point.
Sure.
I want to make that very clear. But to say, well, let's bring on the casino into the eighth state here, because otherwise, these offshore books are going to do it. Yeah, but offshore books aren't running ads every 10 seconds and billboards and radios and big gamble, 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 gamble. And that's what's going to happen if we legalize it, is that the airwaves are going to be completely taken over, and casino is such a high velocity thing. Again, this is more of a personal opinion, not a Sporttrade opinion. It's not a winnable game. It's not historically, not generally a social thing. Like a sports bet is, the game is on, other people are watching it. It's a way to enjoy the game. Casino is, I'm going to open up an instance of a virtual slot machine, and I'm going to skip the fact that it can even do the animation of the thing spinning. I could just get the random number generator. I could get it, and I could get it again and again. It's sort of like, it's a very nuanced take, right? Because we're both in this betting industry. You can still lose. And that's the only thing those two things share in common, right? Is that you're risking money to win money.
Well, I don't know that that's the
And
only
it's
thing, but I think it's a large part of it. So
right.
you have a problem with the requirement. I'm not sure if this is in every state, but definitely in New Jersey, you have to pair. My understanding, anyway, is you have to pair your online sportsbook application with a physical brick and mortar casino. And I'm not sure exactly if it's like you pay them a fee every year or whatever it is every month. I don't know. Um,
Right.
you
Yeah,
can
that's more just like
go on about it.
we feel like businesses should have a way to come into a market that is low cost and it is open and it's inclusive. There are some states where you have to pay a racetrack, or some states where you have to pay a sports team. It's not doesn't mean I have a problem with racetracks or sports teams. It's just that I feel like in a competitive capitalistic environment, it's not the government's job to pick winners and losers. And it's certainly not the government's job to instruct that one private business must pay another private business in order to operate its business.
Mhm.
But the fact is, the only reason these gambling laws come to be is that the powers that be are who need to have some incentivization to do it all, are pushing it, because if it's not for the casinos and the teams in certain states, Ohio, for example, or Arizona or whatever, may never have sports betting.
Mhm.
So I'm saying that with a sincere self awareness of what the alternative could be. But I think at this point that's flipping. There's going to be more pathways in some of these states, over time, and that will be less of an issue than it was 3 years ago.
That's interesting. Yeah, and as another counter argument to that, and I almost universally agree. I think I maybe 90% agree with that. Um, that you should allow winners and losers. I do think you are probably bringing in most of their customers, maybe just a large portion of their customers, and offering, especially to the recreationals, like the same offering that they would have. And the casinos presumably had to put up a large like set of hurdles to jump through. Like they had to build a physical thing. They probably had to pay like the government $1 million or whatever to get licensed in the first place. And now you're sort of taking their customers that maybe they could say that they sort of fought for. So
Totally.
I
I,
can see
I
the
I think that's
sad.
that's very fair. There was a podcast where Joe Asher, who was like a legend in the industry, talked about this with Jason from Smart,
Yeah, that's who it was.
and his view is like, well, the government, well, we subsidize everything. We subsidize electric vehicles, and then there was a discussion about whether subsidies are good, and that just misses the mark entirely. The fact is very simple. When we make a decision to subsidize something as a society, whether it's electric vehicles or whatever, A and one B, it's for the betterment of society. In the electric vehicles case, the argument would be it's better for the environment. That's one A and one B. Two is that who is doing the subsidizing? It's everybody. This isn't when you have a state make an online provider partner with a land-based provider. That's not a subsidy. The subsidy would come from everybody. This business must pay that business. It's a handout. That's what it is. So to call it a subsidy would be a euphemism and a mischaracterization. And again, like the thing I always like to say is like, did Blockbuster not pay a shit ton of taxes and hire a bunch of people and take a bunch of considerable risks and build physical things and lift up the local economies? There was over 9,000, maybe 10,000 Blockbusters in the US at some point. Did Netflix have to pay Blockbuster to offer online streaming to Texans? Of course not. That's crazy. Well, you could say, well, what Blockbuster made all these investments? Yeah, but the whole point of society is and government isn't to choose winners and losers. That's not that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So the argument is really that argument. It to me like that and that's what I would say to that individual.
Blockbuster had to pay the government like $1 million fee in order to open each store. And then like online, like it's sort of like Blockbuster already paid that fee. Netflix is just paying that sort of fee back. Would that change your opinion at all? Or
Right. Maybe, but in this case, it's likely that Netflix would have to pay the exact same license fee. It's not like they're skirting anything.
yeah, well,
Like it's not like we don't pay the same license fee that like that a casino pays because we're licensed. It's just that we have an additional cost. It's just a set of things that, like, it's a protectionist view, and I get it, and I understand it, and I understand gambling's not of interest to most of the people in the public. So it's like the world's smallest violin. I get it. It's just that that's not how any other gambling market works, right? You look at the UK, you look anywhere else. If you're an online provider, you come in, and some states have this, right? Maryland has this, Tennessee has this, Wyoming has this. They thought about it, like, they certainly have land-based entities that put a lot into the market, but they also recognize that their job is to create the most amount of tax revenue, and their job is to create a competitive market for their constituency. And that just way trumps like trying to protect the casino. Or again, these are the views of Alex. These are not. I want to be very clear. These are not the views of Sporttrade necessarily per se. But we're on a podcast. We're riffing, and I wanted to give you an honest answer.
Yeah, and same goes for me. Not the views of Oddpulse, views of Brock. So yeah, I definitely got some protectionist vibes from Asher as well. Whenever I was hearing that, but I also got that he like really believed it. So something about that made me like slightly change, because I went in like after whoever that he was on with from Smarkus said that, I was like, yeah,
Right.
that's clearly correct. Like they should not pay
Right.
this fee to the casino at all. But then I was like, it was not the worst thing. I don't know.
Clearly an incredibly accomplished person. Everyone's going to have a viewpoint,
Yeah.
and it's important for audiences to understand the context. So I'd encourage you or others to look at what his past was,
Yeah.
and that may give a clue, right? Someone may understand what my past was, and that may give a clue as to, in a context as to why I have my opinion.
Yeah.
I'd encourage the audience to go and understand what was his past. How did he become successful? As a result of what? Not hard work, no doubt, intelligence, no doubt, but what other things?
Yeah.
And that could help inform what his opinion is.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. For sure. Okay. Cool. Anything else you want to share?
I'm excited for the fall. I'm really hoping, tell me what I can do to help support the pod. Would love to get the tape on Oddspulse. Yeah, seriously, man, thank you for everything. Thank you for constantly driving our product forward. Just like a sharp bettor will inform the market, you are, a customer that, we love, and, customers that get to see our product this fall, and so on and so forth. They're seeing something that you've had the price discovery, right, to use that term, and sort of guide us in the right direction. So we appreciate that, and looking forward to keeping the relationship going.
Yeah, I appreciate the relationship with you too, and I love Sporttrade. I think you're doing great. Keep up the good work. Obviously, more liquidity the better, more markets the better. But the golf is good, and it's good to have a little bit of a break in this summer lull. Yeah, obviously, still gonna try and bet every day as much as I can, but uh, the basketball, the football, it was just like it was a pretty long season to get to this much more peaceful baseball season. So
Yes. And the tape has been so quiet the last little bit. What's going on? I'm just kidding. No. Super excited to continue to launch new products. And if you're out there and you're like, oh, this thing's interesting, hit me up on DM. And we'd love to get a conversation going.
sweet. Thanks very much, Alex.